They called it Barbarossa, the crucible of the East. It was the ultimate test of Nazi ideology against the Soviet will to survive. A campaign so vast it remains the largest land invasion in human history. This analysis focuses not just on the battles, but on the fatal flaws woven into the German High Command's design. We examine how assumptions about Soviet weakness, rooted in racism and ignorance, created a logistical and mechanical collapse that began months before the first snow fell. We delve into the critical strategic errors, the industrial miracle of the Soviets, and the shocking espionage that gave Stalin the ace up his sleeve at the gates of Moscow. Let's begin the unraveling of the Blitzkrieg's most catastrophic failure. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa begins. The name itself, taken from a medieval Holy Roman Emperor, was designed to sound epical. This was not merely a military campaign. It was Hitler's final, apocalyptic confrontation against communism and slaves, whom he labeled subhuman. It was the largest land invasion in human history. Over 3 million Axis soldiers plunged into the Soviet Union, believing victory was certain in 6 weeks. It was a belief that would cost Germany over 1 million casualties and mark the beginning of the end of the Third Reich. The drive to invade Russia was an ideological certainty for Hitler, dating back to 1925. He needed Lebensraum, or living space, for the German Aryan Empire in Eastern Europe. The goal was to secure Ukraine's agriculture to feed Germany and tap into Russia's rich oil fields and quarries to power the Nazi war machine, all to be produced through the forced labor of the Slavic people. This ideological hatred was masked by diplomacy for 2 years. The 1939 Non-Aggression Pact was always a temporary measure. Hitler felt the Soviets were fundamentally weak, famously stating, "All we've got to do is kick the door in, and the whole edifice will come crumbling down." This confidence was fueled by Soviet military weakness exposed during the Winter War against tiny Finland, which showed an army disorganized and poorly led after Stalin's purges had executed many of its best generals. The die was cast. The invasion struck with devastating surprise. Despite months of intelligence and warnings, the Soviets were caught completely off guard. On the morning of June 22nd, a German sergeant major named Alfred Liskov swam the Bug River to warn Soviet border guards, only to have Stalin label him a turncoat sent to provoke conflict. At the very moment the war began, Soviet commanders were complacent. General Dmitry Pavlov in Kiev was watching a comedy show. General Rokossovsky was the guest of honor at a concert, only ordering his officers to their units after the final notes were played. Following the artillery barrage, the Axis forces, Army Group North for Leningrad, Army Group South for Kiev, and Army Group Center for Moscow, unleashed hell. The Luftwaffe achieved total air superiority, destroying over 3,000 Soviet aircraft on the ground in the first few days. The Blitzkrieg, which worked for German forces, moved so fast they encircled vast groups of Soviet soldiers. Hitler seemed correct. Russia was collapsing. But this early success masked a fatal, built-in flaw: logistics. While the German panzer spearheads moved fast, the rest of the German army, their supply lines, and their artillery were dependent on 700,000 horses. This meant the vast majority of the army moved at foot speed. Compounding the issue was the Soviet Union's wider rail gauge, which required endless, back-breaking reloading of supplies. The speed of the advance was unsustainable. As the distance from Germany grew, the logistics turned into a crisis. The unpaved Russian roads were not just difficult, they were destructive. They turned fine machinery into dust-choked liabilities, causing vehicles to suck up colossal amounts of lubricating oil. As early as August 1941, The German 57 Panzer Corps was reporting consumption rates up to 60 times the norm. The advance began to stall due to mechanical attrition long before the first snow. By August, the German generals felt Moscow was within their grasp. But Hitler, obsessed with seizing resources, made the first of two critical, fatal decisions. He ordered Army Group Center to halt its advance and divert south to eliminate the huge Soviet pockets around Kiev. This pause secured an enormous tactical victory, but strategically it was disastrous. As the German military was tied up in battles of annihilation, they were not only suffering casualties, but were also harassed by Soviet stragglers cutting their supply lines. Most critically, this halt gave the Soviet Union crucial time to pull itself back together and prepare for the defense of Moscow. During that vital pause, the Soviets pulled off one of the greatest industrial feats of the war: the evacuation of over 1,500 major factories and 16 million people to safety in the Urals and Siberia. Production recommenced in open fields and hastily built shelters. While the Wehrmacht pushed east, the Soviet industrial heart, the capacity to manufacture tanks and guns, was not only intact but accelerating. Meanwhile, Stalin stayed in Moscow, refusing to flee, famously ordering the traditional October Revolution Day military parade to be held in Red Square as an act of defiance. Outside the city, women and teenagers were digging deep anti-tank trenches. But the true strategic masterstroke was not industrial, it was espionage. A Soviet spy named Richard Zorge, working as a German journalist in Tokyo, conclusively informed Stalin that Japan had absolutely no plans to attack the Soviet Union. This intelligence was the ace up Stalin's sleeve. He was now free to transfer the vast elite forces stationed in eastern Russia, tough, experienced, and critically, trained for winter warfare in Siberia, to the gates of Moscow. These forces were ready for the counterattack, catching the German army completely by surprise. In October, the German offensive on Moscow, codenamed Operation Typhoon, began. But then came the Rasputitsa, the autumn mud. Ice-cold rains turned the landscape into a deep, muddy nightmare. German tanks could only move a few kilometers a day. Their signature pincer attack tactics became impossible to execute. The ground froze over in November, solving the mud problem, but introducing the ultimate enemy, the Russian winter. Temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. The German army was catastrophically unprepared. Lubricants and fluids in German diesel engines froze solid, requiring soldiers to light fires underneath their vehicles just to keep them running. Their sophisticated equipment failed. Crucially, many German soldiers lacked proper winter gear because Hitler, confident of a swift victory, had not issued winter coats at the start of the summer campaign. At this point, German units had more injuries from frostbite than from Soviet bullets. The Soviet T-34 tank was one of the few machines that kept working. On December 5, 1941, the Soviets launched their massive counteroffensive. The Germans, stuck in their frozen positions, were caught completely off guard. The Siberian troops, fresh and prepared, moved with speed and precision. They began encircling German forces, giving them a taste of their own medicine. The Germans were losing ground so quickly that many were forced to retreat without orders, infuriating Hitler. He fired his commander-in-chief and personally took charge of all military decisions, a move that further weakened the German command. By January 1942, the German forces had been pushed back 250 kilometers. Operation Barbarossa was a catastrophic failure because Hitler's ideological assumptions were wrong. Soviet society did not crumble when he kicked the door in. The Germans needed a short war of maneuver, but the Soviets had forced them into a long, grinding war of production and attrition. Germany lost over 1 million soldiers in the first year. The Soviet Union lost nearly 5 million and showed no signs of slowing down. The colossal sacrifices made on the Eastern Front tied up the majority of Hitler's forces, ultimately making victory in the West possible. You should never attack Russia in the winter, especially when your war machine is dependent on oil that freezes and supplies that rely on horses. If this deep dive into the true logistical and technical failures of Operation Barbarossa changed how you view the Eastern Front, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you for watching.